Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my Week 3 waiver wire targets for the 2022 fantasy football season. Now, over the course of today's episode, we're going to be talking about waiver wire targets at the running back, wide receiver, quarterback, tight end, kicker, and defensive positions. Some of these players are going to benefit from the fact that their teammates got injured this past weekend. Unfortunate, but it is the reality of the sport. While others in their own right had breakout performances who are hopefully going to continue to have high levels of success going forward, players that we can add to our team, give us more depth, and potentially a starting option in the coming weeks in order to help us win some games and eventually a 2022 fantasy football championship. So that's today's schedule. We'll go ahead, we'll talk about those players. Before we begin, if you have not yet already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. We're making daily fantasy football content for the entirety of the 2022 season with the singular goal of trying to help you win a 2022 fantasy football championship. Of course, with our weekly waiver wire videos, rankings at the running back, wide receiver position. Later this week, we're going to also have a trade targets video telling you who to sell high, who to buy low going forward. We typically have 2 streams every weekend, one on Saturday, one on Sunday. For those of you who tried to join us yesterday morning at 8 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, unfortunately, we had a little bit of a technical issue. The first time in my 4 years here on this platform in which I had this error pop up on screen, which wasn't allowing me to stream. I've gone ahead and talked to my YouTube representatives. Hopefully this is not something that is going to continue. We've gone ahead and, resolved it for the future, events, but it's unfortunate. But I was able to put up a, rankings video yesterday for about half the day in order to try to help you guys out as best as I could. So apologies. I'm probably more disappointed than you are that I wasn't able to be there, but nonetheless, we're making content, we're grinding, and I'm trying to help you guys out as best as I possibly can. So we'll continue to do that. Now, before I get into talking about some of these running back targets, I want to remind you guys there are 2 games later tonight. So there are 4 potential teams that could have waiver wire implications for this upcoming week. If in fact something is to happen, I will mention it in tomorrow's running back rankings video. Otherwise, I'm only going ahead and covering players within the Thursday and Sunday games of week 2. That all being mentioned, again, if you guys want to continue to play more fantasy football, even participate tonight, maybe you don't have a player and you want to go ahead and continue to play fantasy football, check out Underdog Fantasy. There's a link down in the description. For those of you who are trying to check them out, go play their pick'ems game, perhaps their drafts. You can go ahead, sign up today using promo code Andrew. When you sign up using the code, you'll get a first-time deposit match up to $100. It helps support the channel. And again, over the course of the week, I try to give you guys as many picks as I can. This past Friday and Saturday, I had a couple pick'ems that I was confident about. I talked about them with you guys, of course, during the Friday video and the Saturday live stream, just kind of showing you guys some of the results in terms of some of those pick'ems. Again, I always want to go and add the insurance every single time I possibly can. So it makes it so where even if you have, a 5-leg higher or lower pick'em slip, even if you get one wrong, you still end up winning. Again, I always somehow manage to find a way to get one wrong. Imagine, look at this one where I got 4 out of the 5 wrong thus far. Again, I'm not the best. I'm trying my best, but hey, if you guys want to go ahead, check that out. Play their higher or lower pick'em game. This one actually did pretty well for me. Antonio Gibson could have really let this one, loose. 20 times my money there would have been fantastic, but Antonio Gibson thought otherwise. So for those of you interested, be sure to check that out. There's a link down in the description. Use promo code Andrew. Thank you very much. All right, let's get into our conversation regarding the running back position, beginning with Raheem Mostert of the Miami Dolphins. Now, the early indication out of this backfield was that this is going to be Chase Edmonds' backfield outright. And even in week 1, we saw Chase Edmonds have 16 touches, 12 on the ground, 4 through the air. Now, going into this week, we thought, okay, Chase Edmonds should be able to get some work and continue to be the primary back, considering Raheem Mostert in week 1 only had 6 total touches, but that wasn't going to continue to be the case. In fact, there was a complete role swap. Raheem Mostert had 14 touches in week 2 against the Baltimore Ravens in a heavily negative game script. He even outsnapped Chase Edmonds to the point where the touches was 14 in the favor of Raheem Mostert and only 6 touches for Chase Edmonds. That in itself is extremely concerning for those of us who have Chase Edmonds, but for those of you who are trying to get potentially a starting running back for the future of the 2022 season, Raheem Mostert definitely does provide that opportunity to you. We know his history. We know he's an extremely talented back. He's coming off of a 9.4 fantasy point performance in which he had a 4.6 yard per carry average, 11 carries on the ground, 3 targets, 3 receptions for 28 yards. Overall, all he was missing was touchdown upside, and considering how negative the game script was and how much Tua had to throw the ball, 6 passing touchdowns, obviously it led to the fact that he wasn't going to get himself a rushing touchdown in this capacity. Nonetheless, high utilization, continues to be a primary threat out of this backfield, and seems to have potentially taken the starting job. We'll keep that monitored going forward, but as of right now, the most valuable back potentially available to you guys. Now, the players I typically want to mention are rostered in less than 50% of leagues. So, in this specific circumstance, we have Raheem Mostert on Yahoo, only rostered in 43%. We're going to go ahead and move on to our number 2. We have Darrel Williams. As of right now, Darrel Williams is a potential pickup option if, in fact, you have James Conner or are looking to fill in a running back role, assuming James Conner misses some time. Now, earlier today, Ian Rappaport did mention that Conner's injury is minor. They don't think it is a big deal within the Cardinals organization. So the anticipation is that even if Conner is to miss 1 week, that would be the extent of it. Now, one of the questions you may have in mind is whether or not Darrel Williams or Eno Benjamin is going to be the starting primary back for this team. As it looks, Darrel Williams came into that game. He played 46% of the offensive snaps, had himself 8 carries for 59 yards, a 7.4 yard per carry average, 3 targets that led to 2 receptions, 13.2 fantasy points because he also accompanied his performance with a red zone rushing touchdown. We know that the Arizona Cardinals running backs, as of the last 2 years, have been in the top 3 in red zone rushing attempts inside the 5-yard line, whether it was James Conner or Kenyon Drake. Whoever the primary goal line back is for this team has immense value, and as of right now, that is Darrel Williams, only rostered in 3% of leagues. We also know that there is going to be an opportunity for Darrel Williams to get work in the receiving game. You look at what he was capable of doing with the Kansas City Chiefs last year. He was the number 22 overall back in a half PPR scoring format, having caught the ball 47 times on 57 receptions due to, of course, the primary injury of Clyde Edwards-Helaire that allowed Darrel Williams to be the primary back for that team for quite some time. Overall, we know he has value. We initially thought that he was going to be the primary backup, but Eno Benjamin came in, kind of served as the third down change of pace as of late. But if James Conner is going to miss time, expect Darrel Williams to be his fill-in role. As for Eno Benjamin, currently rostered in 11% of leagues, I'm not too interested in his services if, in fact, he is going to play, the backup to the backup. He's a running back that will really only be given opportunity if something is to happen to Darrel Williams and James Conner, and then he can step up into that role. Otherwise, yes, he is getting touches, but not to the capacity in which we can trust him on a weekly basis blindly. So let's go ahead and let's replace our number 3 here with Mark Ingram. As we go into week 3, we're of course wondering whether or not Alvin Kamara is going to be healthy and active for us. But Mark Ingram kind of serves into that role as giving us a little bit of an assurance policy if in fact we don't have Alvin Kamara available against the Carolina Panthers in week 3. Now, Mark Ingram's currently rostered in 30% of leagues. For those of you who have already gone and addressed that pickup, mainly because you were worried about the suspension that was looming for Alvin Kamara, again, you already have him on roster. But for those of you who need another running back, potentially one in a relatively good matchup against the Carolina Panthers this week, the guy that we know is going to be the primary running back, we know that, of course, Tony Jones Jr. and Dwayne Washington will get a couple touches in the rotation, but primarily, Mark Ingram is the starting running back when Alvin Kamara is out. And if you're looking for someone to fill in for Kamara's work, or you're in need of a running back for 1 or 2 weeks here until, Kamara returns from that injury, Mark Ingram's a decent option. Moving on to Tyler Allgeier, the rookie running back who is filling in for Damian Williams, who's currently on the injured reserve. Tyler Allgeier presents an opportunity to get rushing attempts, but not quality rushing attempts per se. Yes, he was able to get himself 10 rushing attempts in the 19 snaps that he played, but ultimately this is a backfield that is quite crowded. If in fact we're splitting the carries between Cordero Patterson and Tyler Allgeier, and defenses are already beginning to pick up the idea that as soon as Tyler Allgeier comes into the game, 50% of the time it is most likely going to be a run. They're going to key in on that. It's going to make it a lot more difficult for this young rookie to be able to pick up yardage and find himself success. He's rostered in 13% of leagues. If in fact you are looking for a handcuff for Cordero Patterson, I suppose this works and functions in that regard. They take on the Seattle Seahawks this week. There's always a chance, but until further notice, I expect Cordero Patterson to continue to be the primary back there. Moving on, let's talk about Tyrion Davis-Price, another rookie running back. He is currently the number 2 running back on the San Francisco 49ers roster. Of course, Elijah Mitchell went down with an injury in week 1. Jeff Wilson stepped in as the backup. He will continue to be the primary back going forward, Jeff Wilson Jr. But Tyrion Davis-Price, him and Jordan Mason were in the conversation as to who's going to be the RB2 going forward. It has obviously been declared that Tyrion Davis-Price is going to take that role. 14 carries, 33 yards is not exciting, but due to the fact that Trey Lance had a season-ending ankle injury and is done, the potential for a running quarterback taking away rushing attempts, especially down on the goal line, etc., is no longer threatening these running backs. It makes all the pieces in San Francisco that much more appealing. But as of right now, of course, we do expect Jeff Wilson to be the primary running back going forward until Elijah Mitchell comes back. But if you'd like to handcuff, considering how many running back injuries we've seen from the San Francisco 49ers in the last couple years, not a bad option. Moving on to our final running back I wanted to mention. It is Rachaad White. Yesterday in a post-game interview, The Tampa Bay Buccaneers running back Leonard Fournette mentioned that he is playing on one leg. He's dealing with a hamstring injury, yet he still played 87% of the offensive snaps. If we're going to be in a scenario where, of course, Leonard Fournette is going to play injured, there is a high chance that he continues to strain that hamstring injury and maybe knocks himself out for a broader range of time, which could end up hurting many of us, fantasy managers who have him on roster. I would go ahead, immediately tell you that Rachaad White needs to be on roster. I'm sure you already know you need to have your insurance policies on your bench, but currently a player that is rostered in 34% of leagues, many of us have already gotten taken care of that, considering, Leonard Fournette was already questionable last week. I want to go ahead and once again remind you, pick him up just in case. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the wide receiver position, beginning with Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson, the thumbnail for today's video, had an incredible performance on Sunday with Joe Flacco. 14 targets leading to 8 receptions, 102 receiving yards, 2 receiving touchdowns, even had a rushing attempt. 26 total fantasy points. Now, what kind of separates Garrett Wilson from the pack is the fact that he's getting incredible opportunity in a pass-heavy offense, and he is the number 1 receiving threat in the red zone this season. 8 targets within the red zone and 7 targets inside the 10-yard line, more than any other wide receiver thus far this season. I mentioned it last week. Considering the amount of red zone targets he had in week 1, we knew that they want to design plays for him down in the red zone, and they did exactly that in week 2. They found a lot of success, and even the fact that he only played 60% of the snaps, considering he left the game midway through due to the lower back injury he sustained. He came back, he played well. No problems. A player that is only rostered in 21% of leagues. We're going after Garrett Wilson for sure as our number 1 wide receiver option. Moving on to Jahan Dotson of the Washington Commanders. Jahan Dotson is another player that I need to mention. I know he's currently rostered in 43% of Yahoo leagues, but again, why didn't we all pick him up already last week? He's coming off of a week 1 in which he scored 2 touchdowns. Week 2, he played 98.65% of the offensive snaps, had 5 targets, 4 catches, 59 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown. Another 16-point plus performance from this wide receiver in an offense that, again, is thriving in the passing game. We have seen Curtis Samuel, Terry McLaurin, and Jahan Dotson, even Logan Thomas, be relevant options over the last 2 weeks. And that's going to continue to be the case. In week 3, they take on Philadelphia. I think it's a good matchup. Jahan Dotson needs to be on roster going forward, guys. Moving on, we have Jakobi Meyers. Last year he was the number 1 receiving option for the New England Patriots. That continues to be the same. He's currently only rostered in 35% of the leagues, and he's coming off of a week in which he had 13 receiving targets and 9 receptions, 95 receiving yards, 14 fantasy points. Even in week 1, he had ample opportunity, but the yardage, the receptions, those numbers weren't enough. We know that Jakobi Meyers does not usually find the end zone. Typically, those are either running backs or tight ends for the New England Patriots that accomplish that, or the eventual Nelson Agholor amazing, play down the field. But as of right now, as a PPR threat, he's got a lot of value. He plays majority of the snaps and will continue to be the number 1 as Devontae Parker and Kendrick Bourne are pretty much eliminated themselves from contention as a number 1 receiving threat in this offense. Moving on to Sterling Shepard. Now listen, I had a lot of confidence in Sterling Shepard going into this past week, and he did get the opportunity that I expected him to. 10 targets leading to 6 catches, but unfortunately, those 6 catches had a pretty low average depth of target. He only was able to accumulate 34 total receiving yards, played 88% of the offensive snaps, 6.4 fantasy points. With Kadarius Toney and Kenny Golladay no longer being, immediate threats in this offense, not even playing to any capacity, only a couple snaps for each of them, I expect Sterling Shepard as the veteran receiver on this team to continue to get work and be a primary fantasy option. Moving on, let's talk about Noah Brown. Listen, as long as Michael Gallup is not active and is going to continue to miss time due to his ACL recovery, Noah Brown is the number 2 of this offense. And considering the rapport that he already has built with Cooper Rush, considering they were both second-string players this summer, it looks like they are just perfectly meshing together. Noah Brown had a great week 1. He went ahead, doubled down, and had an even better week 2. And going into week 3 against the New York Giants, again, if in fact it is only CeeDee Lamb and Noah Brown as the primary 1 and 2 wide receivers, I expect Noah Brown to be on the field for the majority of the time and continue to get a wide range of opportunity that may lead to more fantasy points. Moving on to Greg Dortch. Dortch has somehow established himself as the number 2 or even 3 option within this offense. I know Marquise Hollywood-Brown kind of takes priority and then Zach Ertz, but purely Greg Dortch has, in my opinion, leapfrogged AJ Green. And even when DeAndre Hopkins comes back, Greg Dortch could very easily still be in the mix. Maybe Rondale Moore wants to come back and, vie for that overall opportunity. But as of right now, if Rondale Moore is going to continue to miss time, DeAndre Hopkins is out, Andy Isabella is missing time due to an injury. Greg Dortch in the last 2 weeks 10 plus fantasy points in both contests. That in itself speaks volumes. We want to go ahead, potentially roster him. They go against the LA Rams. They're going to have to throw the ball for a majority of that game. He could once again see a wide range of targets that lead to a lot of success. Now let's talk about the second half of the wide receiver position, throwing them up all on the screen at one singular time. We'll present Isaiah McKenzie as our number 7. Again, if Gabriel Davis not only misses tonight, but future weeks, could be an extremely valuable option going forward as the number 2 receiving threat of that Bills offense. We have Russell Gage. We know Mike Evans is suspended next week. We know Julio Jones missed this last week with an injury, and so did Chris Godwin. If in fact Russell Gage is the number 1 receiving threat, we want him on roster because we know Tom Brady's going to have to throw the ball heavily in order to beat Green Bay this upcoming week. We have Joshua Palmer as our number 9. We don't know the status of Justin Herbert, but again, if in fact Keenan Allen is going to miss more time, and considering he is associated with a top-tier offense in the National Football League, fantasy points are always going to trickle in. Ashton Dulin, this last week had a great performance. Again, we thought that there was going to be a breakout game from Paris Campbell, considering Michael Pittman Jr. and Alec Pierce were out, but we were all kind of duped in that regard. I even ended up playing Ashton Dulin in one of my leagues. That's how desperate I got this last weekend, considering how many injuries have plagued me. And it was this, especially a deeper league with 9 bench spots on each squad. So, I was definitely digging, but hey, he was able to put up a great performance, get, over 10 fantasy points. We'll take that. Corey Davis has had 2 good weeks back to back, has seen himself a lot of opportunity in one and a huge touchdown play in the other. We saw Nelson Agholor in a similar situation this past week where he made a huge play for a touchdown, which saved his entire week. Just wanted to mention these guys as options that if you're in need of a wide receiver, could end up picking up going forward in week 3. Let's talk about our tight ends. Gerald Everett is probably the player on today's video that has the higher rostership percentage. Either way, need to mention him. He should be rostered in literally 100% of leagues. He is right now the number 4 overall tight end in fantasy. And that in itself, in my opinion, speaks volumes as to the fact that he's put up 10 plus fantasy points in back-to-back weeks. He needs to be rostered to get that done. Moving on to Logan Thomas. We knew that somebody was going to have a breakout game. It was either going to be him or Robert Tonyan. And Logan Thomas luckily was able to do it, played 73% of the offensive snaps. Looks like he's finally back. Obviously, he's coming off the ACL injury from last year. 3 catches, 37 yards, a receiving touchdown, 11 fantasy points. Going into this upcoming weekend's matchup against Philadelphia should be an advantageous one. Moving on to Mike Gesicki. Now, even though we had to see Tua throw 6 touchdowns for Mike Gesicki to get one of them, it is still promising. I know this upcoming week against Buffalo, it's not the greatest matchup, but going forward, he's going to have to be a receiving threat within this offense. I know he doesn't play very much, but down on the goal line, he's a big body threat, 6'5" plus, has an incredible vertical. That's why he was able to bring down that touchdown. Mike Gesicki, not a bad option, only currently rostered in 25% of leagues. Moving on to Evan Engram. Again, Evan Engram is slowly but surely getting more opportunity. 8 targets, 7 catches, 46 yards, 8.1 fantasy points. In week 1, he had himself a decent amount of targets, just not enough yardage to accommodate that to be a relevant enough fantasy option. But as we continue to progress, especially considering we're going into a matchup against the Los Angeles Chargers this week, Evan Engram is another one of these options we want to consider. Moving on to Tyler Conklin. Tyler Conklin played 100% of the offensive snaps, never came off the field. Played as many snaps as Joe Flacco. Had himself 9 targets, 6 catches, and this is another consecutive week in which we're seeing 7 or more fantasy points from Tyler Conklin. And you may think to yourself, well, that's not enough, Andrew. Well, simply it is. Especially considering they take on Cincinnati this upcoming week. If you're able to get 7 fantasy points at the tight end position in a half PPR scoring format, obviously that's far more in a full PPR, but when you're able to get that stability of production, in comparison to other tight ends right now, it still makes Tyler Conklin a weekly startable option quite easily, to be honest, considering how much inconsistency we have seen from the position. Moving on to our final tight end option, Juwan Johnson. He's another one of these tight ends that in 11 personnel never comes off the field. Played 78% of the offensive snaps for the New Orleans Saints. 7 targets, 4 catches, 40 yards. Has been able to put up 10 fantasy points in the last 2 weeks combined. I know that's not great numbers, but if in fact he continues to just get more and more work, could be an option. Obviously, he's our number 6. I prioritize a lot of other guys ahead of him. But that just kind of shows you how thin the position is going forward. Let's talk about Carson Wentz. Again, he does have a higher rostership percentage, 51%, but this is our final kind of plea before he goes ahead and gets out of the waiver wire conversation. He has been far too good at football not to address this and put him on roster, even if he's a backup. 27 fantasy points in back-to-back weeks. Over 300 passing yards in back-to-back weeks. Over 3 passing touchdowns in back-to-back weeks. That speaks for itself. Carson should be rostered. Moving on, Ryan Tannehill. Again, I know he hasn't played tonight. He takes on the Buffalo Bills. I'm not too worried about the Buffalo Bills matchup. I'm not concerned about it. I'm looking forward. I'm looking for week 3, Ryan Tannehill playing against the Las Vegas Raiders. I expect him to have a great game there. In week 1, he still had himself 19 fantasy points. Could be a startable option in week 3. That's why we're mentioning him. Only rostered currently in 19% of Yahoo leagues. He's definitely a decent quarterback option for those of you looking for a replacement. Moving on to Jared Goff. Again, it is tough to mention Jared Goff in this capacity, but hey, he has been good in the first 2 weeks of the season. 6 passing touchdowns, over 200 passing yards in each game. Currently only rostered in 22% of leagues. Another one of these options that continues to find success every week in comparison to our other quarterbacks that just really aren't getting the job done. Marcus Mariota. Honestly, he played a lot better than I anticipated him to do so against the Los Angeles Rams. Now he takes on the Seattle Seahawks. It's a far more advantageous matchup. Should be able to exploit that with his rushing ability. Let's talk about Jimmy Garoppolo. We know Trey Lance is out. If, in fact, Jimmy Garoppolo is your best available option to replace Trey Lance, so be it. He is going to be a decent fantasy option. Obviously, doesn't have as much upside, but we have seen him average 16 fantasy points per game over the last, 4 or 5 years as the starting quarterback of this team. Going forward, decent option. Not the best one, but we're keeping it monitored. The final player I wanted to mention is Joe Flacco. I don't know how much longer he is going to start for, considering Zach Wilson will eventually return, but Joe Flacco has been ridiculous. As of the first 3 weeks of the season, I think Tua, Carson Wentz, and Joe Flacco lead the league in passing yards. Joe Flacco's coming off of a week in which he had literally 4 passing touchdowns. An incredible performance against the Cleveland Browns. It takes on Cincinnati. The Jets beat Cincinnati last year with Mike White. Why not Joe Flacco? Maybe an option we should be considering more, but again, it's risky to start Joe Flacco in any capacity, especially in 2022. Let's move on to our kicker and defensive questions, beginning with our number 1, Chris Boswell. Boswell, honestly, played pretty well the last couple weeks. Was able to put up 14 fantasy points in week 1 and 8 in week 2. If the team continues to be on the track of not being able to efficiently score the ball down in the red zone or have opportunities to do so because Mitch Trubisky is not a good enough football player, then Chris Boswell will be asked to do even more in this offense, kicking a lot of field goals, especially against Cleveland this week, Thursday night. It's a short week. Typically, that's a defensive matchup where we're hoping the kickers get involved. Moving on to Kaimi Fairbairn of the Houston Texans. Listen, Kaimi Fairbairn, back-to-back weeks of over 10 fantasy points in each week, takes on the Chicago Bears in week 3. Honestly, if you're looking for kicker consistency, we found them here thus far. And our final option is Riley Patterson of the Jacksonville Jaguars taking on the Los Angeles Chargers. Again, he in the last 2 weeks has put up 12 points and 8 points. 3 guys that we didn't mention last week. Potential options for those of you who are in need of a kicker. Let's move on to some defenses. We love the New Orleans Saints taking on the Carolina Panthers. Baker looks terrible. We're starting these guys up. Moving on to the Dallas Cowboys taking on Daniel Jones. Dallas and their defense has stepped up. Of course, we knew that there were valuable options last year. Are going to continue to show that they can be viable fantasy defensive options going forward, especially in this week's contest against the New York Giants. The final option I wanted to mention is Chicago taking on the Houston Texans. I know Houston's offense, or their team as a whole, they are fighters. They're going to continue to fight. But ultimately, this is still a team that isn't going to be able to score as many points as we'd like. So as of right now, Chicago's defense will definitely be able to rack up some points with their ability to cause turnovers, get sacks, etc., and potentially limit the Houston Texans from scoring. Of course, we expect Kaimi Fairbairn to, throw up a couple field goals, but outside of that, if they're able to stop, Davis Mills, Dameon Pierce, Brandon Cooks, we wouldn't be surprised this upcoming week. That's pretty much going to cover it. These are our week 3 waiver wire targets. I want to thank everybody for watching today's video. I appreciate you guys supporting the channel. Of course, if you have not yet already, be sure to subscribe, click the like button down below, and let me know down in the comment section, are there any players I didn't mention for this week's waiver wire video that you guys want to go ahead and potentially pick up? We'll talk about it in the comment section. I appreciate you guys watching. Be sure to check out Underdog Fantasy. Use the link down in the description and use promo code Andrew when you sign up and make a first-time deposit. You'll be given a first-time deposit match up to $100. Check that out. Play some more fantasy football the Underdog way. And until tomorrow, we'll be talking about our top 36 running back rankings. I'll see you guys. Peace.